Good morning, Judith.
Good morning, Sonya.
Welcome to the Coach's Cup podcast. I'm Sonya Green from SonyaGreenCoaching.com.
And I'm Judith Fender. I'm one of the amazing coaches with the No BS weight loss program.
And today we are talking about grief. Again, it's not one of those, flashy topics that everybody's just, woo, grief. But I think that's one of the reasons we need to talk about it,
Mhm.
especially coming off a year where we've had a lot of grief and loss,
Mhm.
not just losing people in the pandemic, but losing relationships, losing, community, a sense of community.
Oh, I find myself saying, I feel like I lost a year with the COVID. Let's just say it.
Yeah.
Just the
Yeah.
loss of normalcy, as we knew it, what we, um, our regular routines in life were disrupted.
Yes. And so it seems a really important time to talk about grief, because it's something that our culture doesn't do well.
Mhm. Oh boy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, I'm really digging in.
We try to avoid it or fix it many times. And so we want to talk today about what grief is,
Mhm.
why it's perfectly human and normal and something that we need to walk toward instead of ignoring or walking away from. And we're going to talk about what it's not, and how to know when maybe some of your feelings do need more investigation.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, Judith, you want to start? You're our handy dandy definition.
We got to know
Person.
where to start.
That's right. For all of you listening, I have to tell you, we were pre-gaming and Judith said, well, what's the definition? And I'm like, you're the definition person. I thought you would have looked it up. And she goes, well, here, I have it right here. So
Yeah, I'd already looked it up. I was
I
quizzing. I was
knew,
quizzing Sonya. I was like,
I
well, tell
knew.
me what's the definition. So, according to the one we agreed upon definition from Psychology Today, I do want to give them credit. Grief is the acute pain that accompanies loss. Because it is a reflection of what we love, it can feel all encompassing. Grief is not limited to the loss of people, but when it follows the loss of a loved one, it may be compounded by feelings of guilt and confusion, especially if the relationship was difficult. So
Mm,
that did go into the people aspect of it.
yeah. Yeah. I think when we think about grief, we often think about losing a loved one, losing a person.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
But we also want to be inclusive in our definition and kind of expand that.
mm-hmm,
It can also be the loss of any community, any relationship. We've talked about if you have lost a child, if you've had a miscarriage or a stillbirth,
mm-hmm,
um, if you've divorced and lost part of your family that way or lost friends, if
mm-hmm.
you've lost pets,
Oh boy.
that, yeah, that's a huge point of grief, that all of those things are suffering a loss. And we don't always think that. I think we often put limits on grief. You can grieve if this happens, but if this happens, am I off there or?
No, no, you're not. My brain was just thinking about myself. Of course, we're always coming back to the self. That's why we're coaches, right?
Absolutely.
But I would agree with that. I think our tendency has been to think of it around death
Mhm.
and not the bigger picture. Like like I was saying about like around COVID and loss of routine.
Yeah.
And there's loss of um, things not attained, right? When you're evaluating your life, if
Mhm.
you've reached a certain age and you didn't achieve or attain things you wanted, whether it's children, whether it's a career, whether it's that retirement home,
Yeah.
there is a sense of loss because it's something you loved and wanted and cared for and anticipated experiencing.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're listening and you have not, you think, well, grief, I don't really have any connection to that. You probably do. In
Oh,
one way or another, I
you
think
do. You do.
grief has touched us all. And we're going to talk about today how you can accept it and really what make it your or you can be an apprentice
Yeah,
to it.
apprentice. Yeah.
We'll talk more about that in a minute. So start talking about one of the first places people go when they start thinking about grief is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross
Right.
and the stages of grief.
Mhm.
You want to talk about those a little bit?
So, The Stages of Grief by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who's she's what do we call her? The grandmother? I think she passed away. Anyway,
Yeah,
I don't
she
know why
has actually.
okay. So it was interesting as we were pre-gaming, so denial. And I said to Sonya, I was like, I think I might be in denial about my mom's death because I find myself saying, I know she's passed away, I know she's gone, but I'll say every day, I can't believe my mom's dead. I cannot believe it. I see her picture. It's still the shock value is still there. And I'm just it must be some level of denial. What would you say?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
The I hear friends who, have said that they would actually pick up the phone
Oh yeah.
to call somebody
Mhm.
before they
Mhm.
realize. And so I think that's, a very common, I mean, of course it's a common thing that we all go through, but
Right here, I have the definition of denial right here with it. It even says denial and shock help us to cope and make survival possible.
yeah.
Denial helps us to pace our feelings of grief. And that meant that I find a lot of comfort in that sentence right there. There
Yeah.
is a grace in denial. It's nature's way of letting in only as much as we can handle. As you accept the reality of the loss and start to ask yourself questions, you are unknowingly beginning the healing process. You are
Mhm.
becoming stronger, and the denial is beginning to fade.
Yeah. I think that's what I was thinking when I was thinking of denial, that if you were in it, like if you were in it all the time, it would be overwhelming. So, as always, our body has a way, it has that control mechanism of
Yeah, you just nailed that one too. It says in the beginning about the first stage of is denial. It helps us survive. The world becomes meaningless and overwhelming. Life makes no
Mhm.
sense. Hmm,
Yeah.
very good, Sonia.
I So what's our second stage?
Anger, and I was thinking as we were transitioning into this, it's like you might be in grief if
Mhm.
you feel these. So anger, it's the it's necessary stage in the healing process.
Yeah.
uh,
Well, and we were talking earlier about excuse me, um about feelings and about especially grief might be especially strong if the relationship has been difficult.
mhm,
I
mhm,
think a lot of times we also don't do anger well as a culture, as a society, and many times we feel guilty about our anger.
mhm,
So we
mhm.
start, throwing on, let's see how many things, how many
Compounding
emotions.
it, compounding it.
Yes, thank you. Can I feel some shame? Can I feel some anger? Can I feel some guilt?
Well, and then so to touch on that even further, with the definition of anger, it's that it's could be what's underneath anger is often
Mhm.
pain. Now, how many times have
Yes.
we coached someone who is so angry And when we're not part of their story and we have we're outside looking in, we can see that it's what in fact they're feeling is just tremendous pain.
Yes.
And that pain turns to anger.
Yeah. Yeah. We have to have an outlet for it. We
Mhm.
have to have an outlet that we can understand. And, it's not fair. It's not fair that I've lost somebody who's important to me. It's not fair that I didn't attain this thing that I wanted to attain. It's just a very normal process for us to have this sense of anger.
I'm like, everyone just needs to go read this, because listen to this. Anger becomes a bridge over the open sea, a connection from you to them. Like, it's something to hold on to. Anger
Mhm.
is something to hold on to. It still gives you a
Yeah.
connection.
Yeah. I I've seen people who've lost loved ones through accidents, and it is their sense of anger at the purposelessness of the situation. Why did this person have to be taken away from me? It wasn't necessary.
Mhm.
And that anger drives their need for justice, I think, is how they're, processing it. Um, but it also, I can see how it connects them. If I can find some justice in this loss, in this tragedy, then, it's kind of a righteous anger.
Which is
Um,
interesting, because that's going to be the sixth one. It's kind of where I hear you that transitioning into. We're not
then
going to
I'll
skip
hold
around.
off there. Okay.
Or do you want me to?
No, no, no. Go right ahead. So move on.
Oh, well, in anger is another indication of the intensity of the love you felt for
Absolutely.
that person or that event, or it's something, like you said, it's something to hold on to. So
And
the
I would also, I'm sorry, but I was just thinking it can also be the fear of not knowing where to move forward
Mhm.
that causes that anger. I think a lot of time anger comes from fear too.
That masking. It's
Yes.
masking. Anger is masking something underneath. So whether it's
Yes.
guilt or fear, pain, love, the anger is just, well, it's easy to tap into,
Yes.
because if you're mad,
Just right
you're
there.
just angry at the world. It just
Yep.
feels right. Well, I have a right to be mad because so and so is gone, or this, my
Yeah.
loss is great and I'm in pain, and
Yeah.
this is how I'm expressing it.
Exactly.
So again, even as I said that about the purpose, which these are not linear, right?
No.
So I did want to say it. So bargaining is the next stage we'll talk about. So before a loss, it seems like you will do anything if only your loved one would be spared. I'll never be angry at my wife again if you'll just let her live, right? So that bargaining process, that you'll become devoted to others. And when you wake up and realize that this did happen, that this person did pass away, then we turn to those what if statements, and only if only.
Yeah.
Bargaining with the pain. We find fault in ourselves when we're bargaining.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, all of these things, like you said, they compound and they intensify the experience.
Mhm.
Um, and so I want everyone to understand that it is normal that we wouldn't want to, nobody wants grief, even though at the end of the day, we're going to come to the point where we encourage people to walk toward it and embrace it. I understand why that's a hard sell.
100%. 100%. Even reading this, I'm like, this, it's just like not pleasant.
Nobody
But
wants to sign up for that.
no. But the alternative is to entwine yourself in this big story, and push it aside, and not deal with it, and not know that it's normal, is twisting yourself up in a big ball of fisherman's wire
Mhm.
and just having a mess.
Yeah.
So knowing about these stages and knowing that it's normal, I find a lot of comfort in that.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So after bargaining is,
Depression.
yeah.
Our after bargaining, our attention moves squarely into the present. Empty feelings present themselves, and grief enters into our lives on a deeper level than we ever imagined. Depressive stages feel as though they'll last forever. I think this is where, when we last week, when we were pre-gaming, or when this came up, we talked about, how the difference between depression and grief.
Yeah.
Did we want to talk about that here?
Sure, absolutely. Because there is there is overlap, but there is also depression that moves beyond grief.
Right. So the depression after a loss is normal, and it's not a fixed state. The question to ask yourself is whether or not the situation you're in is actually depressing, right? Like, does this make sense right now that I would feel this way, and having an understanding? So the difference between grief comes and goes, but depression would be constant. So having like the constant depression while going through grief.
Like you're talking about those stages of denial where you will actually forget. Depression through grief may come at a moment when you pick up the phone and realize your mom is not there. You can't call her. Where actual clinical depression that may need medical intervention is going to just sit with you,
It's
on
gonna be
you.
that fog
Yes.
all the time.
Yes. And that is very important for people to understand.
Mhm.
That there is depression related to grief, and then there is depression that moves beyond that. That's going to require some outside help, and that is absolutely okay too.
Mhm.
Our brains produce chemicals, and sometimes they're not working right, and they don't produce the right chemicals when we need them. Maybe we've already used it all up.
Right. They become depleted, or for whatever
Yeah.
reason, the chemical cocktails matter.
Yes.
What you have going, and you only have so much that your body can deal with at any one time.
So this isn't something you should be judging. If you
Oh,
need additional help, please don't be judging yourself for that.
mhm.
Don't be judging yourself for the way you're handling a situation. I think one of the problems we get into with grief, and I was thinking about it when you were talking about depression, something in that you said, I don't remember now, but we have this idea that there's a certain time period that people are allowed to grieve. And I don't know what it is. I mean, but certainly after a certain time period, if you're still out in public talking about this loved one, talking about your loss, getting emotional about it, people start to feel very uncomfortable.
Yeah. Well, that gets it. They want to fix it. It's
They
uncomfortable
want
for
to fix
them.
it. Yeah. Yeah, because
Yeah.
we're not good at discomfort in our culture. We
Mhm.
are great at buffering or throwing on something to, turn your attention from it.
Mhm.
But we aren't good with the big emotions in our culture.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, One of my really good friends lost her father in a car accident, more, I guess, close to 12 years ago, 13 years ago. And, it came out of nowhere. It was very unexpected, and it was a huge loss for her. Uh, and she grieved very openly, she was in a very raw state. I don't know how else to um to say it, for a while. And people would come to me and they would be like, is she okay? Shouldn't she be,
Mm,
should she still be this torn up? Well, there's no right way to grieve. There's no wrong way to grieve.
mhm.
So the answer to that is yes. Yes, she should still be this way. Yes, she should be exactly where she is
Yeah.
because she is a human on this planet and she is experiencing her grief.
I just can't think of any, like, that's just a beautiful uh, story to connect with, that it has no, there's no timeline, because
Mm-mm.
what we know about thought work, of course, when you think about someone and you have thoughts and your brain is still adjusting to daily, weekly, whenever it comes up,
Yeah,
and you will feel the loss. And I personally, I like, it's love, right?
absolutely.
It's because you loved them so dearly.
Mhm.
That's just feels, it's not the loss, it's the love.
Yeah, absolutely. Grief would never happen without that emotional attachment, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
So we're expanding it beyond losing loved ones. But either way, there's an emotional attachment that's drawing you in. And there's just there's just no timeline. So if people always want to know what how we help somebody who's grieving. One of the biggest things that I would say in working with people, and I've coached people, quite a few people who have gone through different kinds of grief or for different reasons, is don't even think, don't come into it with an idea of how they should be grieving.
Right. Right. I would agree. And yeah, I'm sorry, you were going to say
No, go
something.
ahead.
As we're talking and I'm scanning this list of the difference between grief and depression, I do see a lot of values on you and me. Like, I want to make sure we get these said, because I do believe, as I read this, some people experiencing grief are in fact creating depression for themselves, right?
Mhm.
So there's depression with grief, and where the difference can become this one, grief makes you focus on the person you lost, where depression makes you focus on your own thoughts and emotions.
Yeah.
And that's a subtle difference that I have, even in some of my clients or with myself, when I
Mhm.
start making it about me and stuck
Yeah.
in my problems versus, the loss of, but seeing me as broken and me as the problem. And but I feel so overwhelmed, and that difference.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess it is a subtle difference, but very, very it's more about how unfair it is that I have experienced this versus this person that I'm missing
Yes.
or
Yes.
this
It becomes
thing that I have missed out on.
more ego centered, where
Mhm.
ego, habit brain,
Yeah.
about the self versus the loss, the human experience of losing a person off the earth, or
Yeah.
um, not having. And grief makes you angry, and people know it. With depression, um, depression makes you angry, but it can be hard for other people to tell, which that's interesting. Like, I think I see that
Mhm.
as, that's that internal dialogue. You're
Right.
angry internally, but no one on the outside would ever notice, where someone who's really feeling grief is expressing the anger outwardly.
Yes. Yeah, my friend, I can remember her, calling me in the middle of the night, just sobbing and so angry, just that this happened
Yeah.
to her father, who was such a wonderful person and supported, so many people in her family and, was loving and kind and, just these outbursts. Um, and, that was part of her grief.
Hmm.
And I am so glad that she called me and expressed that rather than feeling shame or guilt about it and
Mhm.
covering it up.
Mhm.
I mean, that's where we really shortchange ourselves.
And even as you're saying that, I think like, that it's healthy
Absolutely.
to express it. If you think of it as in terms of its healthy anger,
Yes.
that when you internalize it and turn it inward, that the depression, the clinical definition, how when we turn it inward, how that cycles and cycles
Yeah.
and compounds and
Well,
becomes.
and that brings up, I want to get through the rest of these. I think we've just got two more stages. I want to get through those two and then talk about how we don't do a very good job and some ways that we have gotten away from grief in our culture that can maybe help us to get back to that healthy grieving process.
Mhm.
So we've got two left.
Acceptance. And so the thing with acceptance is sometimes people confuse accepting as being okay with what happened
Yeah.
versus the reality, right? The reality is the person, we're accepting that the person is gone. Like the healthy is acceptance.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's still sadness around that.
Mhm.
There's still, some of those negative feelings. I'm saying negative in air quotes.
Mhm.
But accepting the fact that that reality is what it is and that they're, you know what? Why don't you bring up your poem now? Because
Mm.
I think that's a good way to talk about acceptance.
Okay. So I came across this poem. So it was a Thai meditating master while traveling through Asia in the 70s. He said, "Do you see this goblet?" And for me, this goblet is glass and it is already broken. I enjoy it. I drink out of it. It holds my water admirably, sometimes even reflecting the sun in beautiful patterns. If I should tap it, it has a lovely ring to it. But when I put this glass on the shelf and the wind knocks it over, or my elbow brushes it off the table and it falls to the ground, it shatters. I say, of course. When I understand that the glass is already broken, every moment with it is precious.
Yeah, I think that's just beautiful. And it's one way for us to think about acceptance and think about loss, that loss is a natural part of life.
Mhm.
We don't have a full experience of life if we don't have loss.
The contrast, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so, and it's, I don't think we've said this in a while. It's important to realize that we experience our positive emotions at the same level that we allow ourselves to experience our negative emotions.
Okay. Explain that.
Okay. So if we are resisting grief, loss, anger, any of those negative emotions that we don't know what to do with. And so we just push them down, push them away, buffer instead of experiencing them. We need to understand that the contrast when we have positive experiences, the joy, the love,
Mhm.
we're going to experience those at the same level because we can't experience full joy and full love and full compassion if we are limiting the level of our negative experiences. We experience those pretty equally
Mhm.
in what we allow ourselves to engage in.
So my brain immediately goes to thinking, of course, like the buffering, right?
Mhm.
Because if we are deep in avoiding the negative feelings, then we are overing somewhere else and not even enjoying that. And then
Yeah.
relationships suffer and we're not balanced.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yeah. And so it's important to remember that, part of accepting loss is remembering and being happy about the life that that person lived, if it's a person that you're grieving. So I have to tell a story that I wasn't thinking about, but my grandparents on my mother's side, I was always very close to them. They were only 40 when I was born, so
Mhm.
it was like having a second set of parents. And my grandfather passed away in 2015. Um, and he and my grandmother they were such a presence in my life. My grandmother's still alive, still is a presence in my life. But so I was mowing the other day, mowing the yard. My husband gave me a very quick, I don't know, he showed me
He
how to
goes
use,
you he goes
yeah, yes, he coached me to use the zero turn mower, and then he
Oh,
left.
oh.
So it was a very quick lesson, and then he left, and here I am with the zero turn mower. Well, I don't know if if you can remember your first time on a zero turn mower, if you've had it, but it's kind of funny because I felt like I was holding back a bucking bronco the whole
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
And so it was kind of a comical experience. I ran over a flower pot. Nothing irreplaceable was lost. But and I was thinking, if my grandfather was watching this right now, he would be rolling. He would have had the best time because he loved to laugh about as much as anybody I've ever known in my life.
Mhm.
And I thought this experience, he would be enjoying this so much. And that acceptance, there's all kinds of feelings there, right? There's the loss still 6 years later that he's not here with us to experience those things. But there's also the joy because I can remember his laughter and I can know that this is something that would have caused that laughter. And so there's also that positive feeling that I can now have, that balance.
Mhm.
You balance the loss with the joy. I don't think the loss ever goes away, but when you give equal airtime to both sides, to both the negative and positive feelings, it really opens the door to experience the positive at a higher level as well.
Mhm. Mhm. I like just want to come back and thinking about the stages.
Mhm.
So the acceptance would be like accepting the changes in your life. You're creating friendships, moving forward, carrying on without the person as we are going through acceptance. And it's subtle, like you just said, like you said, 6 years later,
Yeah.
and you're finding yourself at a level of acceptance and like you're living again.
Mhm. Yeah.
And it's become normal. I'm air quoting
Yeah.
accepting.
Yeah, and there's always going to be that sense of, I wish he was there to share this with.
Yes, yes.
I have an aunt who passed away when I was 21, and she was such a force in my life. And there every once in a while I'll be like, can I still hear her? Like, can I still hear her voice? Because it's important to me to think back, sometimes to have some kind of connection when it's been so long.
Mhm, mhm,
But yeah, I want to be able to have the full experience
mhm,
because it's our lives are much sweeter when we can have both the full negative and positive.
mhm. Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think about acceptance, and this is glaring at me. It's accept instead of denying our feelings, we listen to our needs more. Again, coming back to the stages,
Hmm.
thinking about clients I have been coaching that are not there yet. And I'm
Hmm.
even questioning myself, where am I at on this I guess I'm still back at denial.
Well, and let's say again that these are not linear steps. We
No, no, no,
mentioned that earlier, but
no. Because I do think it's interesting because I do feel very accepting and in denial
mhm.
and bargaining and I don't know, depression. No.
Yeah,
Anyway,
it's not a neat process. So
no.
if you're, if you're into controlling things and controlling your process, grief is not going to be a neat little process. Oh, today I'm going to feel denial. That's not the way it works.
No, no, because no, it's an awareness. And I'm like, I notice I keep saying I can't believe my mom is dead. I notice I keep saying that. Why do I keep saying that? And then hello, opening up this. I'm like, oh, yeah, okay. It's because it's helping me absorb the shock of what's gone on. It
Yeah.
helps me cope
Yeah.
by saying that.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for joining us this week as we began our discussion on grief. We appreciate you, dedicated listeners to the Coach's Cup, and we'll be back again next week with part 2 of our discussion. I hope you'll come back and listen. In the meantime, if you enjoy our podcast, please go to iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts and give us a review. It helps more people to find our podcast and share our what we're bringing to you uh, on to others in the world. Thanks again. We'll see you next week. Bye bye.